All right, buckle up, because today we are diving into some seriously thought-provoking stuff in the world of evolutionary biology.
Oh, going deep today.
You know it. We're talking about challenging the very foundation of how we view evolution, putting those classic Darwinian principles to the test.
This is like fun.
You know I love pushing the boundaries a bit. So get this, our source material today is titled Evolution, Time of the Gaps. And it's making me rethink everything I thought I knew about, well, everything.
Okay, time of the gaps. That's a new one.
Right. It's all about questioning whether those massive stretches of evolutionary time, the ones we can't actually observe, are being used as a crutch to explain what we don't fully
I
understand.
see where you're going with this. Like instead of saying we don't know, are we saying given enough time, anything is possible?
Exactly. It's like saying, well, with enough time, a monkey randomly hitting keys on a typewriter could eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare. Technically possible, but is it the most likely explanation?
And that's where this idea of time of the gaps gets interesting because the research compares it to the God of the gaps concept.
Hold on, God of the Gap. You mean like lightning, must be Thor kind of thing.
Exactly, using something unknowable to fill in the blanks. And the research suggests we might be doing the same thing with evolutionary time. We see these huge leaps in complexity, these massive changes in species over time. And we say, well, natural selection did it, given millions of years. But are we really looking at the mechanisms, the how and the why, or are we just assuming time itself is the explanation?
So are we saying Darwin was wrong?
Whoa, hold on. Let's not throw Darwin out with the bathwater just yet. Natural selection is still a crucial factor. But maybe, and this is where things get really interesting, maybe it's not the whole story.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So if natural selection isn't the primary driver, what is? If it's not just survival of the fittest, then what's driving these incredible evolutionary changes we see in the fossil record?
Well, let's dive into some evidence, shall we? The source highlights fascinating research on Daphnia, these tiny little crustaceans. Scientists found that these guys were undergoing significant genetic changes in just a decade.
A decade, that's practically a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms.
Precisely. And that's what makes it so compelling. This research suggests that evolution might not always be this slow, plodding process we often imagine. What if there's an internal genetic rhythm, a kind of evolutionary dance happening much faster than we ever thought possible?
So it's less about adapting to the environment and more about a species' potential for change that's already encoded in its DNA.
You're getting it. Imagine the possibilities for variation already existing within a species' genes, like a vast library of potential adaptations.
And natural selection is just deciding which books to check out.
In a way, yes. So we're not just talking about random mutations and environmental pressure slowly shaping species over eons. We're talking about the possibility of a more dynamic, internally driven process.
This is seriously blowing my mind.
And we're just getting started. Because if this time of the gaps idea holds water, it challenges some of the most fundamental assumptions we have about how life on Earth has unfolded.
Okay, so if time of the gaps is really making us rethink the role of natural selection and the pace of evolution, how does it address some of those classic pieces of evidence we often use to support evolution, like, the fossil record? I mean, you've got bones, teeth, footprints, a whole tangible history of life on Earth.
Right, you can't just ignore the fossil record. And the research doesn't. It actually uses those gaps in the fossil record as potential evidence to support its claims.
Wait, how do gaps in the fossil record support a new theory of evolution? That seems counterintuitive.
It's like this, instead of seeing those gaps as missing pieces in the story of evolution, maybe they're actually pointing to periods of rapid evolutionary change, bursts of diversification that happen too quickly to be captured in the fossil record.
So we're not seeing a gradual linear progression in the fossils. We're seeing snapshots, glimpses into a much more dynamic process.
Exactly. Think about those early mammals that evolved after the dinosaurs died out. The fossil record shows a relatively quick explosion of different mammal species. Now, was that just a coincidence, a fluke of fossilization? Or could it be that those early mammals were undergoing a period of rapid genetic diversification driven by internal mechanisms that allowed them to quickly fill all those ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs?
It's like evolution hit the fast forward button for a bit. It's a possibility. And those gaps in the fossil record might actually be evidence of that fast forward button in action.
Okay, I can see how the fossil record, even with its gaps, doesn't necessarily contradict this idea of a more dynamic, internally driven evolutionary process. But what about the sheer vastness of geological time? I mean, even if we can observe these smaller evolutionary changes in a lab setting over a few generations, can we really extrapolate that to explain the incredible diversity and complexity we see in nature over millions, even billions of years?
It's a fair question, and it's something a lot of people struggle with. The research acknowledges that we can't just ignore the enormity of time involved in evolution. But it also argues that just because something takes a long time to happen doesn't mean we should stop asking questions about how it happened. So we can't just chalk everything up to, well, give it a few million years and anything is possible.
Right. It's about looking beyond the timescale and focusing on the mechanisms. The source uses a great analogy. We don't fully understand how gravity works, but we don't just shrug and say, well, it's been around for billions of years, so who cares? We keep searching for answers, for deeper explanations.
It's about acknowledging the mystery while still pursuing a better understanding of it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole time of the gaps concept so fascinating. It's pushing us to confront those big unanswered questions about the mechanisms of evolution, even if it means challenging some long-held assumptions.
And one of those big assumptions, as you were saying earlier, is about the role of natural selection itself. I mean, we've been taught that it's the primary driver of evolution, the force that shapes life on Earth. But is it possible that we've overestimated its influence?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the research suggests that it might just be the case. We might need to reevaluate the balance of power between external forces like natural selection and those internal genetic mechanisms we were talking about earlier.
So are we saying that natural selection is taking a backseat? That it's not as important as we once thought in the grand scheme of evolution?
Not necessarily a back seat, maybe more like a shared driver's seat. Natural selection is still a powerful force, shaping and refining, but those raw ingredients, the potential for change, might be coming from within, from the very building blocks of life.
We're talking about those internal genetic mechanisms again, right? Like those rapid changes we saw in the Daphnia.
Exactly. What if those weren't just flukes, but rather glimpses into a more fundamental aspect of evolution? Imagine a vast library of genetic possibilities, each book a different evolutionary pathway. Natural selection might guide us to certain sections, but the library itself, that incredible potential for variation, was always there.
So instead of a species slowly adapting to its environment over time, it's more like it has this internal reservoir of potential changes, and natural selection is just flipping through the pages, so to speak.
It's a compelling idea, and it opens up so many questions about how we view evolution. What if those missing links in the fossil record aren't missing at all? What if they represent those moments when evolution took a sharp turn, a sudden leap forward, driven by these internal genetic mechanisms?
Almost like evolution has a bit of a jump cut edit going on.
Exactly. And maybe those jump cuts are happening more often than we realize, shaping the diversity of life in ways we're only beginning to understand.
This is seriously making me rethink how I picture the whole evolutionary tree. Like, maybe those branches aren't so much slowly growing as they are suddenly sprouting in all these unexpected directions.
Now you're getting it. And that's what's so exciting about this time of the gaps concept.
Yeah.
It's not just a new theory, it's a whole new lens through which to view the history of life on Earth.
It's like we're shifting from a Darwinian film reel to a fully immersive, dynamic CGI experience.
I like that analogy. And with this new perspective comes a whole new set of questions for researchers to explore. What are the genetic mechanisms driving these rapid changes? Can we predict those evolutionary leaps? And if so, what does that mean for our understanding of things like disease, adaptation, and even the future of our own species?
It's like we're on the verge of a whole new era in evolutionary biology, one where we're not just passive observers, but active explorers, delving into the very code of life to unravel its mysteries.
And who knows what incredible discoveries await us? That's the beauty of science. It's a journey of constant exploration and discovery.
Absolutely. This deep dive has been a wild ride, challenging our assumptions and opening our minds to new possibilities. I think I can speak for all our listeners when I say we're walking away with a whole new appreciation for the complexities of evolution.
And maybe even a little bit of awe at the sheer elegance and ingenuity of life itself.
Couldn't said it better myself. And for those of you who want to delve even deeper into Time of the Gaps, we'll have links to all the research mentioned today in the show notes.
Don't forget to check them out. It's some fascinating stuff.
And until next time, keep those minds curious and remember, sometimes the greatest discoveries come when we dare to question everything we thought we knew. This is The Deep Dive. Signing off.